Starting with using intent flags, like we discussed earlier, you can make all the changes or bring all the changes to your define the launch modes through manifest file. You can also do that through using intents, and while using intents you have to use flags to do so. And we have a flag named as flag activity new task, which brings the same behavior as a single task launch mode value. We have another flag which is single top flag activity single top, which brings the same behavior as single top launch mode value. And we have the third one, flag activity clear top, for which you do not have a similar attribute in the manifest, which is, so basically this is exclusive to intent methods. If the activity being started is already running in the current task, then instead of launching a new instance of that activity, all other activities on top of it are destroyed, and this intent is delivered to the resumed instance of the activity now on top through on new intent. So this is something which is exclusive to intent method, and you can't find this method in the manifest way of making the launches. So this is basically something which has to be done. This clear top has to be done most of the times. It is done in conjunction with the new task. When used together, these flags are a way of locating an existing activity in another task and putting it in a position where it can respond to the intent. Now let's talk about handling affinities. What exactly is affinity? The affinity indicates which task on an activity prefers to belong to. By default, all activities from the same app have an affinity for each other. So by default, all activities in the same app prefer to be in the same task. However, you can modify the default affinity for an activity. The activities defined in different apps can share an affinity, or the activities defined in the same app can be assigned different task affinities. So affinity is basically the tendency of an activity to belong to a particular task, and obviously it would any activity would like to stay in the task of its own app, all the activities together, but you can change this behavior as well. You can modify the affinity for a given activity with task affinity attribute of the activity element. So this is the manifest attribute that you can change. The task affinity attributes takes a string value which must be unique from the default package name declared in the manifest element, because the system uses that name to identify the default task affinity for the app. So the task affinity attribute will be taking a string value, and which must be unique from the default package name declared in the manifest element. The affinity comes into play in two circumstances: when the intent that launches an activity contains the flag activity new task flag. So in case you are launching an activity with the flag activity new task, then in that case the affinity will come into picture. A new activity is by default launched into the task of the activity that called start activity. It's pushed onto the same backstack as the caller. However, if the intent passed to start activity contains the flag activity new task flag, the system looks for a different task to house the new activity. Often it's a new task. However, it doesn't have to be. If there's already an existing task with the same affinity as the new activity, the activity is launched into that task. If not, it begins a new task. So this is how the affinity can be defined, so that the activity that is being launched can be decided which task it should belong to. If this flag causes an activity to begin a new task and the user presses the home button to leave it, there must be some way for the user to navigate back to the task. Some entities such as Notification Manager always start activities in an external task, never as part of their own. So they always put flag activity new task in the intents they pass to start activity. Now one thing which I want to point out here is that this is, now going forward you will see there are a lot of things wherein you as a developer will have to take a call, and of course you will utilize the Android developer docs to to have a better judgment of things and take better decisions. For example, in this case, you can see that they have mentioned that some entities such as notification manager always start activities in an external task, never as part of their own. So they always put flag activity new task in the intents they pass to start activity. Now this is something which is behavioral, and it all depends upon the kind of developer you are, and you can utilize these tricks, these tips, to make better apps. If you have an activity that can be invoked by an external entity that might use this flag, take care that the user has independent way to get back to the task that started, such as with a launcher icon, the root activity of the task has a category launcher intent filter. See the starting a task section below. So we'll discuss it later. Now in case there is when an activity has its allow task reparenting attribute set to true, in this case the activity can move from the task it starts to the task it has an affinity for. When that task comes to the foreground, for example, suppose that an activity that reports weather conditions is selected in selected cities is defined as part of a travel app. It has the same affinity as other activities in the same app, which is default of course, and it allows reparenting with this attribute. When one of your activities starts the weather report activity, it initially belongs to the same task as your activity. However, when the travel apps task comes to the foreground, the weather reporter activity is reassigned to the task and displayed within it. Now, clearing the backstack. If the user leaves a task for a long time, the system clears the task of all the activities except the root activity. When the user returns to the task again, only the root activity is restored. Now, of course, this is for the case when the user has left the app for a long time. The system behaves this way because after an extended amount of time, users likely have abandoned what they were doing, and of course, they are not expecting the same things to appear in the app. There are some activity attributes that you can use to modify this behavior. Always retain task state. If this attribute is set to true in the root activity of a task, the default behavior just described does not happen. The task retains all activities in its stack even after a long period. So there are basically a couple of attributes that you can set depending upon the requirement of your app. Starting a task, you can set up an activity as the entry point for a task by giving it an intent filter with the main and category launcher as the specified category. An intent filter of this kind causes an icon and label for the activity to be displayed in the app launcher, giving user a way to launch the activity and to return to the task that it creates anytime after it has been launched. This ability is important. The second ability is important. Users must be able to leave a task and then come back to it later using this activity launcher. For this reason, the two launch modes that mark activities as always initiating a task, single task and single instance, should be used only when the activity has an action main and an category launcher filter. Imagine, for example, what could happen if the filter is missing. An intent launches a single task activity, initiating a new task, and this user spends some time working in that task. The user then presses the home button. The task is now sent to the background and is not visible. Now the user has no way to return to the task because it is not represented in the app launcher. For those cases where you don't want the user to be able to return to an activity, set the activity elements finish on task launch to be true. Now this was about the tasks in the backstacks, and now we will discuss the processes and app lifecycle in next couple of videos. Meanwhile, request you to subscribe to the channel so that you can stay connected to the entire sessions. Take care. Bye bye.